All right. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Bethany Dean, the Media and Communications Specialist here at AIM, and today's webinar is Changing the Department of Defense with Passive Radio Frequency Identification. Our speaker for today's session is Scott Prouse, the Assistant Program Manager for the Marine Corps Platform Integration Center. First, a little bit about AIM. AIM is the Industry Association for Automatic Identification and Data Capture Technologies. We serve as a hub for quality resources covering all types of barcode, RFID, and mobile computing information. We also foster new auto ID innovations that stimulate market growth. We encourage you to get involved. If you would like additional information, reach out to us at info@aimglobal.org. And then a little bit about our antitrust policy. It is the policy of AIM to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of the antitrust laws. And then a few other housekeeping notes. All registrants are muted upon entering the webinar, but we still want you to participate. To send a question, select the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Also, a recording of the webinar will be available in the coming days to those that have registered. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Scott.
Thank you very much, Bethany. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try to make this as interesting as I possibly can for everyone. I want this to be a valuable use of your time, and I certainly appreciate you coming on and watching this. Kind of a quick overview. We did present MCPIC at RFID Live in 2023, and we presented again this year. And gratefully, both times we were award winners at the convention. Why McPick is interesting and why you guys should have an interest in it is it in 1990, which is hard to believe because President H.W. Bush was the president at the time. Congress came out and federally mandated that all government organizations were supposed to pass an audit. And 35 years later, the only DoD organization or service that has been able to pass has been the Marine Corps. We passed in 2023. We passed in 2024, and I can't say that McPick is the sole reason that we passed, but I can tell you that we would not have passed without McPick. As a result of our passing audit and some of the things that McPick is able to do, it has generated an awful lot of interest in McPick across DoD, and we're kind of working towards a joint program office for McPick, hopefully sometime this year. Um, the when you get into audit, and Congress and auditors have this really strange idea. They think that if they come into a service, you're supposed to know what kind of equipment you have, and you're also supposed to know where it is. And that sounds like a simple thing, but as we go through this and you see some of the slides that are here, you'll see the complexity of the inventories that are out there and why DoD struggles to be able to do that. McPick is what the military calls a force multiplier. It's a tool that we can use that better prepares us to deploy and to be able to more readily respond to contingencies and things that happen because we've got a much clearer grasp of what we have and where it is. It's really, really frustrating when you're looking for an asset and you don't know where it is, and McPick solves that problem. It also creates a lot of efficiencies in the sense, and I'll get into this as I go through the presentation, but it reduces inventory times from weeks and months literally to hours. And that's a huge labor savings when you start, pushing that across services and at least across the Marine Corps. So next slide, please. So let's talk about MCPIC. All right, Marine Corps Platform Integration Center. What does that mean? Well, it really is kind of a name that we're going to get away from because if you're going to push this across DoD, other services really don't want to hear about Marine Corps anything. But as a platform integration center, fundamentally what we do is we're able to use passive radio frequency identification, passive RFID, and combination of GPS and other locator tools to be able to rapidly count and locate assets. Speed to count and location as a service is how we build that, and it's what everybody is really looking for. Um, as you go through this, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but as we go through this, when you start understanding the complexities of the inventories that exist across DoD, you'll understand why you have to use technology to be able to manage to be able to manage and count your stuff. We are required on the government side to be able to do a full inventory once a year. Um, I don't know from a commercial standpoint how often commercial businesses do that, but I can tell you we are mandated by federal law that we have to do an inventory every year. That becomes really challenging when you don't have the tools to do it. Next slide, please. So this is the act that I was telling you about. It is hard to believe that something that was done in 1990 and 35 years later, the Air Force, and I don't mean this as a way to deprecate any of the other services. They're bigger than we are, so it's a bigger challenge for them. But the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Coast Guard have still not passed the congressionally mandated audit. And that's something that when we're charged with being stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, part of that means, hey, we can find, we can account for, and we know what we have. And that sounds like a very simple and straightforward subject or sentence, but when you deal with the size and the scale of the inventories across DoD, you start to understand why that's such a challenge for us to do. Next slide, please. So when people think of the American military, and you've seen F-35s and you've seen all these cool weapon systems that we have, and most of those things are state of the art. I mean, they're very impressive. They're incredible weapon systems. They're very expensive, and you need to know where the pieces and parts of those things are. But that's generally what people think of when they think about the military. What they don't think about is how do we account for those items? What are the systems that we use to account for all of this equipment? And in military jargon, and I don't like throwing around acronyms because most of the time, unless you're from the military and even that specific branch, it gets confusing. But what they're called are APSRs, accountable property systems of records. And what that is that's a system that has been designated either at the service level or at the DoD level as being appropriate and accountable for holding all the assets that that particular organization is putting into it. Most of these tools are very expensive. The Marine Corps we use right now, Global Combat Service Support System, Marine Corps, and we're spending over $130 million a year for that particular system. Next slide, please. So if you kind of get a look at this one, and it is one slide, but the two things that I want to call out here is one, I want you to get a sense of scale for all the equipment that is out there. I mean, you're talking literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of assets that you have to try to keep up with. This is not a small task. If you look at the bottom right, and when I first saw this, I had to kind of take a look at it myself. We have variants, so it's not just that. And I'm looking at the Humvee here. You've got, I think it's 17 or 20 different variants of that one asset. So, it's not enough to know that, okay, hey, this is a Humvee. Well, you've got to know what variant of the Humvee it is. And then you've got to know all the collateral equipment that goes with it, because from version to version, what's required to be part of the asset to make it combat effective changes. That's referred to as the SL3 list. In a given item like a Humvee, you've got probably 50 or 60 different items that have to go with that vehicle to make it combat effective. So to know if an asset is complete, and you got to know the variant, you got to know what's supposed to be in it, and you got to know if all of those assets are there. And when you look at the size and the scale, just in the pictures that you're seeing in this particular slide, you're talking hours and hours and hours and hours and weeks and days and months and all the rest of that to try to count this stuff. And it is no small feat, let me assure you. I was a supply officer in the Marine Corps for about 23 years. So, I know a thing or two about doing inventories. And I can tell you it's without the proper tools, it's a very painful and tedious process. Next slide, please. So, you look at this and you're thinking, okay, this is the American military. You've got all these systems, you've got all of this equipment. How do we count this stuff? And the irony here, and I got to present MCPIC at the component level property accountability workshop up in DC last year. And what I pointed out to everybody, because you had all the inventory managers from across DoD, is that you can't do it manually. And I'm going to use GCSS Marine Corps as an example because I don't want to look like I'm picking on anybody else. This is what the Marine Corps has. So when you go in and you request to do an inventory in one of these systems, it literally produces count sheets, okay? Pieces of paper with lists of assets on them, both with a location and with a serial number. And you put those things on a clipboard and you do grab that stubby pencil and you start walking the lots trying to find this stuff and account for it. And not only do you have to do that manually, but when the results of the inventory is finally tabulated, now you've got to go key that stuff back in. So you have lots and lots of opportunities to get things wrong. It's very easy when you're doing an inventory to misidentify an asset, to get it in the wrong location, to lose track of a location. It's just a horrendous problem. And when you're working with one of these systems, and this is really DoD wide, at least with all the systems that I'm familiar with, and I've worked with a fair number of them at this point. Um, when you go in and you look in a system and it says that this asset is in this location, and you go to that location and that asset is not there, you are totally out of schlitz. You have no idea where it is. Now you're typically going to look somewhere close to that location and hope that it's close by because you really don't have anything else. But you have no way to readily relocate that asset if it gets lost in the system and you don't have the proper location recorded. All of these systems, by and large, are manual systems, which means, you're relying on people who move these assets around to properly record where they put it in that last location so you can keep the system up to date. The problem with that is that this stuff is moving around in a lot of instances, a lot of times and very quickly, and they just fail to do it. I'm not going to say that it's an intentional. I'm not going to say that they're lazy. It's just the normal course of operations makes it very difficult for you to be able to record all of this stuff when you're doing it in a manual fashion. And that's the reason that you got to get away with that. That's the reason why you've got to have a tool like McPick. Next slide, please. So, so why is it so difficult for the government if we know this is a problem and we've clearly identified that it is? Why is it so difficult for us to go out and get a new system that does something that can fix this stuff for us? And the answer to that question, which is what most people, at least what I would be thinking, is that the government acquisition process is founded in law. All right. Congress passes lots and lots and lots and lots of laws. And the federal acquisition system, has, I mean, I'm not an acquisition officer, but I can tell you they have reams and volumes of laws that pertain, and it makes it very, very difficult for you to go out there and actually do an acquisition. That process can take years. You also, because to work on a government network, you have to be accredited. All right. And that's a really big thing in the cyber world. You can't just walk in, with a brand new piece of software and say, "Hey, I'm going to throw this up on the Marine Corps network or I'm going to throw this up on the Navy's network." No, you have to go through an accreditation process. It's called risk management framework. That's the current process that you're using. Um, and it's the process just gets longer and longer as more and more threats and vulnerabilities are identified and new conditions get added to it as part of the accreditation process. A typical RMF process, to accreditation for a system that's never been accredited before can take 2 years and easily a couple of $1 million. And that becomes a problem. The government needs to be able to use software that's available out there, and it's difficult for vendors and companies to get it accredited because of the cost and the way that that process works. I mean, it's a very unique process. I mean, it just is what it is, and it gets frustrating for the vendors and the companies that are out there because it's hard for them to do. So, we'll talk more about that as we kind of go through this thing. But you need to understand that the government is many things, but nimble is not an acronym or not a description that I would use to describe us, in most instances. Next slide, please. So, how did the Marine Corps do this? Well, we turned to MCPIC. All right, and MCPIC was not originally developed to be used the way that we're using it now. All right. McPick was originally developed about 20 years ago down in Blunt Island Command. That's in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was built not to do inventory management, it was built to support maritime prepositioning forces. You may or may not be familiar with that term, but what that is that the Marine Corps figured out a long time ago that it's easy for us to move people where we need them to go, but it's difficult for us to move large amounts of equipment. So what they decided to do, we've done it in any number of wars, and it works pretty well, is that they preloaded a brigade's worth of equipment on a squadron of ships. There's usually 5 or 6 ships in an MPF squadron, and when the balloon goes up and we've got to go fight the bad guys, they can launch those ships and they're stationed around the world. They grab the squadron that's closest to the place they need to be. They get those ships sailing to whatever the port is that they're gonna offload at, and then they fly the Marines in, and then the Marines marry up with the equipment, and then they go fight the bad guys. Well, what did that mean from a management and a requirement standpoint? Well, it means that, when you're doing offloads, those get really complicated and they're very complex. I mean, you've seen the pictures of World War II, and these ships they land on the shore and all this stuff goes driving off. It's gotten a lot more sophisticated than that in the last 80 years. So you need to know stuff has got to come off in a prescribed order so that it provides the maximum capabilities for the forces ashore. So to manage that process, you need to know where the everything is on the ships that are there, and you need to know what's come off of that ship. So when they started doing that, they built McPick, and what they would do is that, as the equipment would come off the loading ramps, they had readers there. So once everything was tagged and it started coming off in real time, you're capturing everything that's coming off the ship. And not only that, because you had various staging areas that you would also have fixed readers on so that you could see, hey, this is off the ship, it's gone to the ground forces, it's gone to the air wing, it's gone whoever needed it. And you were able in real time to track what that stuff was doing and where it actually was. um, so when we were looking back in 2017 at Logcom, and I get no credit for this because I didn't even know what McPick was at the time. um, Somebody much smarter than me said, "Hey, Blunt Island has got this tool, and maybe we could use it up here because at that point in time, we kept trying to pass audit, and we could not pass audit. They would come in, they would ask us, well, when auditors come in, they will grab a pool, they'll select a pool of equipment. It can be 200 items, 400, 500, but then they're going to go in and they're going to say, okay, your system says this item is in location X, and you go to location X and that item isn't there, and you can only miss about 5%, and then you failed the audit. We couldn't get anywhere close to that. I mean, and I'm just being honest, we didn't know what we had and we didn't know where it was. So when we started doing McPicks, suddenly all of that changed. When yeah, I'm kind of get a little bit ahead of myself, but McPick is what we refer to as a closed loop system, which means what you do is you make sure you have readers at all the gates and egress points where equipment can come in and out of a facility. You can do it at a base level, you can do it at an organizational level. It just depends on what you're trying to do. But what happens is you go in there, and it's referred to as the surge marking effort. You've got to go in, and that's the painful part of doing McPick, and it's the painful part of doing any RFID or passive RFID system is that you've got to go in and do the initial marking of all the assets. It took us about 3 years to mark everything here at Logcom, and I'm physically sitting here in Albany, Georgia, but Logcom has got two main bases. You've got logistics base Albany, which is in Georgia. You've got logistics base Barstow, which is out in the desert out in California. And between those two places, we had about 185,000 items that we needed to mark. We hold about 20% of the inventory for the Marine Corps. So if we don't pass audit, the Marine Corps doesn't pass audit, which is why I can tell you that, McPick has been a game changer for us. Next slide, please. So, and this is the good news part of the story. So you can see some of the different passive RFID tags that we use. We can also track people, which is what that DBIZ card is that you see on the left there. And we use different types of tags for different types of assets. The hard coated plastic ones that you see on the right, those mostly go on vehicles or rather large items. The printable tags that you see kind of in the middle there, those are for assets that are a little bit smaller. Most of those are you can use those on component parts. Whatever you're trying to track, if it's not a big item, you're going to use one of the smaller tags. But what we were able to do was dramatically reduce the inventory cycle times that we had. The example that I prefer, and I've used this many times, one of the inventory segments that we have here on Albany is referred to as military equipment over 100,000. ME over 100K is the way we express it, and those are your big items. Okay, those are tanks, those are trucks, those are Humvees, they're bulldozers. It's your big engineering. It's all your big stuff. It's stuff that costs more than $100,000 to each item to procure. The last inventory that they had done prior to the implementation of McPick, it took them 14 months to complete that inventory. And that was for about 5,800 items. Now, if you're sitting out there, you'd be doing the same thing I'm doing, going, how in the heck can it take you that long to count that many items? 5,800 items shouldn't take you that long. The problem is that those assets are moving around on the base all the time. They're constantly moving. They're going here, there. They're going for washes. They're going for maintenance and repair. They do all kinds of stuff. So when it's moving around like that, it really complicates your ability to do that inventory. And 14 months was what it took for them to do it. So once we had everything marked and in McPick, I can do that same inventory now in about 4 hours. So if you go from 14 months to 4 hours, you gain a lot of efficiencies. And not only that, and not only is it just the efficiencies that you gain, but you reduce your because you're using a system to do it, you're taking the human error out of it. So, for us to be able to do that has been really, I mean, and I used the word game changer before, and I use that word a lot because that's what one of the freaking commanding officers that was in charge that was using McPick for the first time. That's how he described it. Man, this is a game changer. Um, we introduced it into the Maintenance Depot Marine Corps, which is a huge facility that we have here on base. And we did it. They had 14 production lines, and we put it on two, as an experiment. We put it on two of their production lines. And what they wanted to be able to do, if you're familiar with a maintenance depot, they bring in a vehicle or an asset and they strip it down to the frame. And then they basically recondition all the parts, either replace them or rehabilitate them. Then they rebuild the asset. And at the end of the day, you end up with a brand new asset that, can go forth and go fight the bad guys when the time comes. Um, the challenge that they had is that as these sub-assemblies come off of the vehicles, they got to go, no two assemblies go to the same set of things to get reconditioned. They've got blast and steam, they've got calibration, they've got rebuild shops, they've got paint. There's all kinds of different things that they did. And the challenge that you got is that how do you track all those different things through all those different shops when no two of them have the exact same path? So by being able to, when we put in a lot of infrastructure so they could do this, because we've got some cool tools, we were able to track all the way through there for every individual asset. And McPick does location history. So you could click on an asset or a subassembly and you could see which shops it had been through, which it had to be, which were remaining. You could also see if there was a bottleneck somewhere in the production process, which was a key thing for them because they didn't have that kind of visibility before. And then you also got a notification when it came out and it, was in the finished parts inventory and was now ready to be reassembled. So what they were able to do was they were able to like make sure that the technician that was going to reinstall that particular, subassembly actually knew that the part was available so that when they sent him to the production line to put the part on, the part was there and you didn't waste any time. Prior to that, there was a schedule for each asset. And if it said on day 59, you reinstall the front brake assemblies, on day 59, the brake guy shows up and maybe it's there, maybe it's not. But if it isn't, no one knows where it is. We totally revamped what was going on over there and their ability to manage the process. We were able to reduce the repair cycle time by 29% on those two lines. And if you've any kind of a maintenance person or you've ever worked in a maintenance environment, a 29% reduction in your repair cycle time is a pretty significant improvement. So they're in the process now of trying to put MCPIC across the rest of the production lines. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is what this is, and Bethany's going to run it for me here in a split second. But this is a video that shows how we capture those assets in these parking lots. When I said it went from 14 months to 4 hours, this is how we do it now. And since there isn't any sound on this, I'm going to go ahead and talk through it a little bit. So what you're seeing, they're using a gem cart to do this. In desert conditions, we use gators. Any kind of a vehicle can be used to plant the reader in there. You're seeing what some of the lots look like. This is Albany that you're looking at, and you're seeing the rows of vehicles that we have. So as this thing goes through there, you've got a reader and it's picking these assets up, and you can see to the right, for the right of the screen there, as it's capturing them. Well, man, it's a whole lot easier and a whole lot faster to ride around in a gym cart or a gator to do this than it is to walk around with a clipboard trying to capture them one at a time. And not only does it capture them for you, but it locates them. So this is a 2D map that you just saw there. So you can see real quick, hey man, those are all warehouses. That's where all that stuff was. And this is how we can go in there and capture all of that stuff. So not only can I capture it for you and tell you what you got, I can also tell you where it is, and then I can show you on a map where it is. So if you're an inventory manager, that's kind of handy stuff to have. Go ahead, next slide, please. So, yeah, and, there's a video we're going to show on this. So, not only do we have the gem card and the Pac-Man, but we also have robotic inventories. Now, I'm personally not necessarily a big fan of robotic inventories. I just say that because robots are not inexpensive. And I think you got to have a really unique business case to be able to justify spending a robot. But in DoD world, people love robots because they're cool looking, and everybody says, "Wow, we're doing robotic inventories." Well, okay, but does that really make sense? I mean, when we look at this stuff, and at least from the program office level, when I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to go do it, there you have to have a business case. All right, if I got to look at what I'm going to spend against what I'm going to get, and does it make sense? And if there are some circumstances where robotic inventories make sense, um, but I got to tell you, if you're coming to me for robots and you're in DoD, yeah, you better have a really good business case for this. Otherwise, I'm going to persuade you that that may not be the best way to do it. But where it makes sense, it's a really cool tool. Can you play that video, Bethany? It's the Gary video. So what you're seeing here, that's the maintenance depot. It's a very large compound. And when you're going to see this, you'll see the robot and you'll see it running around. And obviously, because we're filming this, we needed to do it in the daytime. You know, just showing you a dark video really wasn't going to help you much. And it has LiDAR on there, so we can do the LiDAR reads, and that's how it navigates around the warehouse. And so you can see the robot pulling out, and it's going to run around and it does its thing, and then it comes back and it self docks. And we're showing this in the daytime because you want to be able to see it. That's not when this actually runs. These things come on about 2 o'clock in the morning. They go rolling through, they do all their captures, and then they go back and park. And then you're getting a live data feed from the robot as it moves along because you have Wi-Fi in this facility. And so McPick will also work in a disconnected state, and data sync up when it gets back online. But the robot will run around. It captures where everything is, and when the work crew comes in the next morning, they can look in McPick and they now know where everything is because they're busy moving stuff all day long. They're not recording anything. Of course, they know they got this as a tool, so they don't have to try to do that. But it refreshes your inventory and location data every single night, so you've got fresh and good data when you come in the morning and you begin your workday. And there again, it's going to give you locations for everything. And when you're in McPick, I can't demonstrate this right here, but you can click on those dots, and those dots will open up, and they'll give you the list of the actual assets, and then you can click on the assets and get any of the data that you need for that. When we do the marking, one of the things, and I didn't really explain this, but when we go in there and we do the marking piece, you capture attributes. At least that's what we refer to them in the system. But we also take pictures of the assets. So we can capture virtually as many attributes as the customer wants. That's not a big deal for us to do. And then we take pictures of the asset, we take pictures of the data plate, we take pictures of any of the data associated, the stencil numbers, and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And that's how we QC our entries. We're very, very big on data quality with McPick. So, all of the entries that are done are QC'd, and we QC them against the photographs that are there. So I can pull up that when I'm looking at an entry and I want to make sure that I have the right serial number, I can look at a picture of the serial number to verify that we did capture the right serial number, the right NIN, all of the data that we're in that we're trying to track. One of the things that's kind of interesting, I didn't actually know this or really think about it until I started doing McPick, is that you'll notice that a lot of the military's equipment, three-quarters of it are painted some sort of a green color, so it can run around and operate in woods. About a quarter is painted in desert tan, so that if you have to deploy to a desert environment, then you're running around in the desert in a brown vehicle as opposed to running around the desert in a green vehicle that everybody's going to be able to see for 100 miles. But nowhere in the Marine Corps supply system does it tell you the color of the vehicle. You give it serial number, you'll get a NIN, you can get all the stuff, but you don't know if you got the right color asset, and if you're depending on where you're going to deploy, having the right color on that asset is not an insignificant thing. In McPick, we capture that. So if I want to verify that, hey, I'm putting together a desert package and I got all desert painted vehicles, we can tell you and confirm all of that. Okay, next slide, please. So we do 2D maps and we do 3D maps. And the 3D maps, well, I won't say obviously, but I'm assuming that with this group, you probably know 3D maps basically are what we're doing inside of warehouses. All right, you've got multiple layers of shelving. You need to see where an asset is, not just two-dimensionally, but three-dimensionally because they stack up. This is a 2D map. And you got to remember, before we did McPick, this was like nobody had access to any of this sort of stuff. It's just really good if you're a commander, really if you're any kind of an inventory manager, to be able to see not just what it is, but where it is, and you can drill down to as much detail as you need for that particular asset. I told you that in DoD we're required to do an inventory once a year. That's what the guidelines state we have to do. But people, if you have a tool that allows you to readily inventory your inventory. No, that's kind of a redundant statement, but if it allows you to do your inventory in a really fast manner, you're no longer hamstrung with that one, but with having to do it once a year. So for most of the customers that we do a full inventory of everything every month. All right, and we could do it more than that if we wanted to. A month seems to be about right, but what that does is it constantly keeps your entire inventory up to date, and it means that you readily know where all of your stuff is. And with McPick, not only where it is, but where it's been. Next slide, please. So you can see, as we do this, and this is, I've already kind of talked through the maintenance depot. You can see what one of the production line looks like there, but it's a very, very powerful tool that allows efficiencies that were just unheard of before we implemented McPick. Being able to see what you got, being able to know where it is, being able to track it through your sub assemblies and all your different shops. I mean, that was Star Wars to us 10 years ago. I mean, that wasn't even a sphere of possibility. Um, McPick is government owned, and it's 100% government owned and fully accredited. So, for the people in DoD that need this kind of a tool, there is no licensing fee because the Marine Corps has already paid for it. And if any of you know anything about the Marine Corps, you should know that we're like the cheapest service out there. If I go ask another service, hey, I need $2 or $3 million for an implementation, they don't even blink. Yeah, yeah, no problem. I go tell a Marine Corps fund manager I need $2 or $3 million, and they come unglued. So the reality of it is, and we had to build this over time, and we were always very limited on the amount of funding that we had available to do it. So the unintended consequence of this is that for a passive RFID system, and especially one with the capabilities that McPick has, it's just it's just very difficult to beat us from a price standpoint. We have had to be efficient. I won't tell you that we did that because we were particularly smart. We did it because we had to, because we absolutely had to stretch the budgets that we had as far as we could, because we're constantly being hit with new requirements and we need to be able to fund those. So it's a very efficient system, not just from an operational standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint. Some of that was not altogether intended and designed. It was just a net benefit of us having to operate the way the Marine Corps requires, but it is a benefit to our customers. And when you're doing McPick, and I've done a fair number of implementations. I've been doing this, got almost 9 years now. Um, what you find, and I don't know, I haven't sold it to a commercial customer yet, but if you bring it in the DoD world, you find out that customers are really they'll spend a lot of money up front to get a capability. But then the inevitable question is what is my sustainment cost? And that's where it gets really touchy, because that's a ongoing cost that they know they're going to have to bear. So the fact that we can minimize to the greatest possible extent what their sustainment costs are going to be really helps us in the long run. It helps us, and it promotes efficiency across DoD. What we do when we do an implementation is we really start with what is the problem that the customer is trying to solve. And then everything that we do is tailored to that net effect. And, there's a lot of tools. We're still not done with them yet, but there's a lot of tools in the toolbox that I have available to me able for me to give them the level of visibility that's required. But at the same time, we try to give you what you need to solve your problem, but no more, because we want to keep your sustainment costs as low as we can possibly keep them. Next slide, please. And I'm looking at the clock too, Bethany. I'm getting close. Sorry, I like to talk. So what's happened since 2023? Yep, we passed the audit. Marine Corps passed the audit in 2023. We passed it in 2024. Yeah, and we're the only service at this point. And I hope, with the next audit cycle, we're not the only one. But as it stands right now, the Marine Corps is the only one to pass it, and that's bringing a lot of interest from a lot of the other services, because they're going, "How are you guys doing this?" The Navy is bringing on their own instance of McPick. DLA is bringing on their own instance of McPick. DHS is trying to come on with McPick. So, I mean, there's a lot of interest. I talked to all the services at this point: the Army, Transcom, the Air Force. I mean, it's crazy what it's doing right now. These are all good things. And if you're a taxpayer, you should be saying go McPick, because I'm reducing costs across DoD. Next slide, please. So one of the cool things that we have done is that we have there's it's now Elms, and I'm sorry, but they only changed. It used to be DPass, and they changed it in the last 6 weeks, and that was before I did this slide. But now it's called Elms Enterprise Logistics Management Services, and we did a full interface with them. So what that created as a capability was for us to create a fully automated warehouse. All right, now you got to remember DoD is not Amazon. All right. I don't have all the stuff that Amazon has. But what we were able to do and what happens is that not only can I do fully automated inventory where you don't have to, it automatically updates when you do the cycle counts, but when things move in the warehouse, because we've got that level of visibility with MCPIC tells the APSR, which is Elms, that this asset is no longer located in this location. It's now in this location. And it automatically sends that as a signal. Elms does a move transaction and now puts that asset in that new location. So remember, I told you before, if you went to a location and it wasn't there, you were kind of out of Schlitz. That doesn't happen when the warehouses where we have Elms and we have MCPIC. The warehouse keeps up with where everything is, and it does it in a fully automated way. If you can play the video on that, Bethany.
The Consolidated Storage Program at Camp Lejeune faced an insurmountable task using handwritten inventory transfer sheets and manual data entry to track thousands of moving containers of essential military equipment across multiple warehouses. This process perpetuated backlogs of data entry, lost items, and inherently inaccurate inventory data. Implementation of MCPIC's intelligent warehousing capabilities using RFID to precisely locate and track containers ultimately digitized the CSP workflow and proved a trust in data worthy of direct interface to DPass. When MCPIC detects a location change for an item, it passes this new location to the DPass warehouse module, where the move transaction is automatically performed to place the identified asset in the new location. The MCPIC to DPass interface replaces pencil-in-hand manual processes of the past with the power of automatic detection and real-time location management, providing a level of visibility into readiness, total accountability, and audit responsiveness not realized before.
So, so that's kind of one of the things that we were able to do, and I can do that. I can do that with any of the APSRs that are out there, so long as we allow me to interface with them. We are with the MCPIC is set up to be agnostic. We don't care what APSR you got. We don't care what warehouse management system you're using. So long as you will interface with me, we've got an app that allows me to very quickly build interfaces, and it's just a good and smart way to do business. Go ahead, next slide. I'm getting tight on time, and I apologize. This I put in there primarily because every time I go to RFID Live, I always get a gazillion questions on how you do business with the government. So I put this in here. These are some contact information if you're interested in doing something like that. We do have people here on base that's their job, is to help you do business with the government. So I included this just as a resource for the people that were there. Next slide, please. Okay, I apologize. I went almost the full 45 minutes, but you're lucky because I get really talkative sometimes, and I could go a heck of a lot longer than that. So I think we're at the question and answer session. And remember, I told you I'm a supply logistics officer. I'm not a true IT weenie. So, ask your questions, but just understand that I have technical limits here.
All right, so we'll get started with the questions. We already have a couple of questions up here in the question and answer section, but if you would like to ask a question, you can do it through the Q&A application at the bottom of the screen. So the first question we have here is, how does the audit differ from the 2004 IUID item unique identification regulation? In order to achieve/pass the audit, your assets need to be marked with a unique identifier, correct?
That is correct, and that's a really good point. Okay, and I'm gonna talk to that because that came up when I was talking to the property accountability workshop. So Congress, some time back, probably 15 years ago, mandated IUID. And IUID, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a very small tag. I mean, it's less than the size of a dime, and it's got information encoded on that. Only the government, you would have thought they would have standardized how the tag was built. There's about 6 different, data sets that they did, none of which match. So you got to query the tag to figure out what's the data sequence. But IUID works. All right. You can scan it. And if you've got if it's correctly registered in the IUID database, it will tell you what that asset is. And quite frankly, that is a better system than if you're just sitting out there with a stubby pencil trying to get it off of a paper sheet. Here's the problem with IUID. IUID still requires that you scan assets one at a time. And if you go back and you look at those inventories, and the size and the scale, if you've got to go through there and scan each one of those things one at a time, it's still going to kill you from an efficiency standpoint. It's going to take you a long time to scan those things one at a time. The other part of IUID is it tells you what the asset is, but it does not capture the location of where you scanned it. So yeah, you can verify that you have it, but and it's going to take you a long time to do it, but you're still stuck trying to manually record where the asset was seen. And that's why you need a tool that's automated to be able to do that. And IUID, God love them, is not terrible, but it just ain't fast enough to be able to meet the requirements that we have, in my opinion. Go ahead.
All right, so the next question we have is, did the USMC develop MCPIC platform or did the USMC contract with an outsider venue? Can this system be shared with other government agencies? And it seems like a no-brainer, especially with the current administration's focus on efficiency and eliminating government waste.
So so yes, the Marine Corps now. So here's how we built McPick, and it was a little bit at a time because our funding was always really limited. We have a vendor that we have been working with for the last 20 years. We have a great partnership with them, understanding that they still have to compete for the contract whenever it comes up and all that other sort of stuff. But the thing about it is it was built using a third party vendor. They did the coding for us. Now the Marine Corps determined the requirements. They built it for us. They tested it for us. We verified that it worked. And yes, it is a McPick is government property. All right. I don't own it. The Marine Corps doesn't own it. It is funded to pay, the taxpayers paid for it. So yes, if you're another service or a DoD organization, then yes, you can request to use McPick. You got to sign an MOA, a memorandum of understanding, and an agreement. So we kind of keep it. We don't want multiple versions of it. We want to be able to support one version. But the Navy's getting it, DLA is getting it, DHS is getting it. So yeah, that's not something that if you're a government agency, come call me and I'll help you get it.
All right, and then our next question here. I have worked with the DoD service areas for IUID compliance. The pushback from some of the depots or facilities was that jobs would be eliminated, automating processes versus pen and paper. I've seen such pushback from legislators as well who did not want to see their constituents lose their jobs. How did you overcome this challenge?
Another great question. I'm going to talk about this, and I'll try to be fast about it. So when you go in, anytime you try to implement anything that's IT related, there's always going to be pushback, unless you're dealing with kids, because they embrace new technology because they grew up that way. My kids are like that, and I'm like, yeah, okay. But the reality of it is that if when you're dealing with government organizations, most of the time you're working with an older workforce. So when we come in and we're going to implement McPick, yeah, there is the exact concern of, oh my God, is this going to eliminate my job? Is this going to do this? No. What we try to do is that we try to implement, one of the things I didn't cover when I was talking about implementation is we also look at the business processes of the organization that we're coming into. And what we try to do is integrate into the existing business processes. If I walk through the door and I tell you, hey man, your whole job is going to change tomorrow because I'm going to wipe out everything that you know and give you this new tool, ain't gonna happen, man. They're gonna go sideways. They're not gonna do it. So what we try to do is we implement as far forward into the existing processes as we possibly can. And what we try to do is show them that, hey, you're still doing the same job. You're just doing it more efficiently with a tablet instead of a clipboard. Um, what has happened here is that there's never enough people to do all the stuff that is going on. Government resources are constrained. You guys are certainly familiar with what's going on with Doge and all the cuts that have been coming with that. So what it does and what the net effect of this has been is that it takes people that were doing jobs that were redundant or could be done much, much faster with technology, and it makes them available to do other things that they couldn't do before. So we haven't had big cutbacks that from implementing McPick, we don't go in there and say, okay, now we're going to cut 25% of your workforce. But what will happen is that they will realign 25% of that workforce into other tasks that they didn't have time to do before because they just didn't have the capability to do it. So yeah, it realigns some of the work that gets done and certainly how the work gets done, but it doesn't result in us going in and, cutting people out. At least it hasn't up to this point. Go ahead.
And then the next question we have here is what systems/processes do you have in place to secure your data and prevent security breaches?
So, and if you're dealing, I always refer to them as the cyber Nazis, and they don't really appreciate that term. But you can't do anything in the government unless your system is accredited. And I deal with cyber issues all day long, all the time. They have a purpose, and I'm not saying that they don't, but God love them. They are the bane of my existence because I'm constantly having to adjust things. The McPick has a very, very robust set of internal security controls. Everything is locked down. You can't get to the system without the right credentials. You can't operate on the government network unless you meet all the security protocols. So, yeah, it's an open system in the sense that it's very flexible, but it's also very, very tightly controlled per all the protocols that are required to operate in the government's environment. We have never been not accredited. We're in the process of moving from a server-based, platform that was down in Blunt Island. We'll be in the Azure cloud come this July. So I mean, the security protocols that we are required to adhere to are quite frankly never ending. But we do what we got to do to try to keep the data safe and keep the Marine Corps safe. Go ahead.
Okay. The next question we have here is which encoding scheme are you using? And is it correct that the DoD is working on a new replacement encoding scheme?
Wow, remember I told you I was a supply guy and not a true IT professional? If you will, I can't tell you what language we're programming in, and we use several languages, quite frankly. And I only know that because I have to deal with these people sometimes. But it. I work with a great crew of people, and the techie guys are amazing. But if you will, I think I know on the first part of the slider and the page is coming up. Well, somewhere in there, you got my contact information, or you can reach out to Bethany and those guys. But send me that question and in an email, scott.prouse, Prouse at usmc.mil, and I'll get you an answer for that. But yeah, I can't answer that one. But I am proud that you think I could.
And then this next question here, whose passive RFID tags and encoders do you use and what software is used to encode and print those tags?
So we use most of the tags, not all, but most of the tags that we use come from Omni. And the reason that we use Omni is that we have done an astronomical amount of testing on the tags that we use. And I didn't talk about that before, but since that's come up, let's talk about it for a split second. If you're using any kind of a passive RFID platform, those tags have got to stay with the asset that they're attached to. And if you lose tags, and I'll give you an example, the Marine Corps had tried down here several years before we implemented McPick to use a system called EYM, Enhanced Yard Management. And there's a thought process, especially in government world, that says, hey, I buy from the cheapest vendor and a tag is a tag is a tag. Let me assure you, no, it is not. We use a custom adhesive that we have worked with Omni to develop. And your read rates, we do an awful lot of testing to make sure that we get the read rates we want from the tags that we are using. So when I need tags, I do not run down to Staples and go buy some pre-printed tags and start slapping them on everything. We have a very formatted process for doing that. It's very prescribed. It's very deliberate. We encode the tags using the McPick software because it was set up to do that. And we comply with all DoD requirements for EIPCs. I think it's 96 bits that we have to have. One of the things that comes up when I'm dealing with active duty Marines in particular, is they're convinced that if somebody flies a drone over, you're going to get the complete schema of every piece of equipment that's on the battlefield, and that ain't how that works. Um, if you get a read, and you've got to be within, most of the time, within 15 feet to be able to get a read, all you would get is the 96 EI, EPC number. You're not going to get any of the data associated with that because you're not going to have access to the system. So you wouldn't know where it is. You wouldn't know what it was. You just know you got a read on something. Go ahead.
All right, so our next question is, what combination of readers and antennas do you use to get 3D location in the warehouses, including shelf/slot level accuracy?
That's another really good question. So we use a series of different readers. One of the tools, and we didn't talk about it, but one of the ones that we really, really like are called SASLs, Signal Acquisition Source Location Antennas. It's made by a company called RF Controls. And what that does is that gives us, that's a constant. If you're familiar with how the passive RFID tags work, you have to ping them, they wake up, and then they send a signal. What happens with a SASL is that it continuously streams those pings. So what'll happen is you can see, in real time when an asset is moving around. And it's a really cool tool. There's a lot to putting them in, and they're not inexpensive, but when they last a really long time, and that will give you, inside of a warehouse, the 3D visibility that you're looking for, because it broadcasts and captures in 3D. We also use, LiDAR to build our 3D models. We can do that with the robots. We've got other different tools that we use for that. If we're doing it in volume, we contract it out because it's quicker to do it that way and cheaper. But yeah, we build the 3D models. We associate the data, and you've got to associate. You got to associate a location in MCPIC to a location in the APSR. It doesn't do you any good if I give you an 8-digit grid, because nobody's going to be able to read that. But you've got to be able to turn, when we have tools for doing that, that turns that 8-digit grid into a location, whether it's in a bin, whether it's the second shelf up, the third shelf up, or whatever it is, so that you can translate that into the APSR. So when you go into the APSR where that asset is. Go ahead.
All right, and then our last question for today, do you use
No, not our
handheld
last one.
do you use handheld RFID readers in addition to the fixed readers you are using on the side by side? And if so,
Absolutely.
what kind of read range are you getting?
So absolutely, we do that. We have and I can't. I wish I could tell you off my hand. So what we do is the most basic tool that you can have when you're doing this is a tablet. All right, the tablet is how we create the entries. It's why we burn the tags. It's all that other sort of stuff. But the tablets themselves are kind of tethered, and when I say tethered, I mean you've got a strap that hangs around your neck and or over your shoulder so that you can drive the tablet around. You have an integrated freaking passive RFID reader on the tablet, but it's much, much faster if you Bluetooth a scan gun to that, and you're just waving the scanner around while the tag or the tablet is just hanging. So it Bluetooths in. We get ranges 20 feet, 25 feet is what we'll get with those. But when you go in there, you just simply scan up and down, and you'll do all your captures, and it's really simple, and all that data gets Bluetooth into the tablet and then off into the system.
All
Is
right,
that it?
that's it. Thank you everyone
Awesome.
for your great questions. And
Yeah, those are some really good questions.
as Scott mentioned, here is his information here on the screen if you would like to reach out to him and ask him any other questions.
Hey, thanks for everybody's time. I hope this was interesting to you. You've got my contact information, so if you feel like you want to reach out and get more additional information, I'm certainly amenable to that. And I hope this was interesting and a good use of your time. But thank you for your attention. And Bethany, thanks for all your help.
Yeah, thank you so much for presenting for us today.
All right, guys. Thanks
Okay.
all.